Would you ask Mrs. Brown to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, ready to carry on?
Yeah.
Well done, thank you. Yes.
Thanks, sir. Mrs. Brown, could we just go back to where we began, and that was your sort of training. Was your 5-year degree course linked to the Chartered Institute for Housings in any way, shape or form?
Yes, that was my 5 years, yeah.
And did that course address issues specific to fire safety? Can you remember?
It was a significant long time ago, and I don't remember specifically, unfortunately.
Okay. And does membership of the Chartered Institute require any CPD training to be pursued?
It's recommended, yeah.
Is it mandatory?
Not that I haven't done any.
Okay. At all, or in relation to fire safety?
I haven't done any recent at all.
Okay. In relation, considering from the perspective of evacuation, have you ever been informed, instructed or trained to the effect that stay put is sufficient on its own, or is that simply an assumption you made as a response to a fire?
Sufficient on its own, as in...
As a response to a fire?
I'm not quite sure what you were. I mean, obviously there are 5 fire safety measures that sit behind that to enable that to be, in terms of things like fire closures, and is that what you mean?
No.
Sorry.
No. Have you ever had any specific training on the approach to safety control measures, following on from your answer, to control risks arising from fire safety hazards?
No, I haven't had any specific fire risk training. So.
Have you had any specific training on PEEPs themselves, the circumstances in which they're required, their scope, the detail?
No, but I have. No, I haven't.
Okay. Now, can I go back to the storage of data in relation to vulnerable residents? You said earlier that neighbourhood officers could enter data on vulnerable residents to CRM, and David Noble or one of his team would enter vulnerability data on Capita. Now, my first question is this. Did you recognise that there was a risk of different data being recorded on 2 systems, i.e. Capita and CRM?
I did, but where we put it depended on the source of it, the information coming in. But I did recognise, if I'm right in your question, I did recognise that there was a risk if CRM didn't feed back into Capita. I did recognise that.
And how did you mitigate that risk?
So it was something that I raised with our IT department and asked for them to think about a solution for that. And I don't remember the outcome of that. I mean, obviously, all these systems and processes were in development, and I don't remember if the feed goes backwards.
And so, would it be fair to say that you lack the specific technical knowledge to know whether all relevant information was being captured after 2016 on CRM?
What I knew was that some information was being captured on CRM, and I knew that some information was being captured on Capita, and everything that went onto Capita fed into CRM. That's what I knew. So I would have known to look in 2 places.
Were any checks carried out to ensure that up-to-date information was fully captured on CRM and was being accessed as the most up-to-date source of data by your employees?
I'm not sure how we could have checked that it was being captured. I'm not quite sure of your question there. Sorry.
Data's been collected from questionnaires.
Yeah.
Do you accept that?
Yes, definitely.
That data, after 2016, is recorded on CRM. Do you accept that?
No, not all of it. So the questionnaire information was still being put into Capita. from the tenancy profile information was always still put into Capita. That didn't change.
And do you know of the extent to which that information was then captured or could be accessed via CRM?
So my understanding is that all information that went through Capita would feed into CRM, and therefore it could be accessed by anybody and would continue to be that way. That feed never changed.
But you accepted earlier on that there was a risk that information might not be captured in that way.
No, I don't think I was saying that. What I was saying was that there was a risk that information that was put directly into CRM wasn't fed back into Capita. So there wasn't the link back is what I'm saying. I'm certain that the profiling information went into Capita.
So there'd be a risk that would be different information on Capita than there was on CRM.
Yes, and these were things that we were looking at, whether we continue to use Capita in the long term or whether we move forward.
And stopping there, let's take it step by step. Ms. Brown, probably be easier. Were you absolutely sure that after CRM came online, that all your employees were accessing the right system to access the most up-to-date information about vulnerable residents?
I'm certain that so the majority of staff were using just CRM, and that's where they would see their up-to-date information. Neighbourhood staff and who needed to know more detailed information could view W2 where the main data was held and could view Capita.
Was there a minority of employees who were only accessing Capita and who therefore may not have access to the full, complete and accurate
so
information
everybody across...
If you just wait for it's really important you just wait for the question to finish rather than talking over.
So everyone across the organisation had access to CRM. We rolled it out across the organisation, so everybody could see that single view information and information that was on there in terms of vulnerability.
Now, you said that in the event of an emergency, TMO officers would be able to produce a list of vulnerable residents. Would that list be derived from CRM or Capita?
I mean, clearly the list that David Noble gave us, I'm not sure where it came from, to be fair. I mean, I would expect when we asked that for people to have used both, I think, in the interim. Even though that
Possibly gave rise to a risk of an employee accessing incomplete data on Capita? Or would you expect them to go to CRM and then Capita?
So someone like David Noble, as part of that vulnerability policy, what it says in there is that we would build templates of information to utilise. And I would expect reports to come from David's team principally is where they came when we needed information. He could access both Capita and CRM.
Okay. Right. Can we turn now to previous fires? And earlier on in your evidence, we discussed Adair. Do you remember that there was a fire at Trellick Tower in April 2017?
Yes, I do.
And is it right that you attended the scene following the fire?
I attended the scene the following morning when I knew about it.
Yeah. And that had the tower, Trellick Tower, been evacuated to some extent as a result of the fire? Do you remember that?
I'm trying to remember. I don't know whether it was a voluntary evacuation or a fire brigade evacuation.
It doesn't really matter, does it?
I'm not sure. I wasn't there, so I can't tell you precisely what happened the night before.
But you are aware that there was an evacuation, whether voluntarily or sponsored by...
I remember that some people had left the building, yeah. But the fire had been contained within the property.
Had that fire at Adair, at Trellick Tower, prompted you to reconsider the need for PEEPs in relation to vulnerable residents?
No, the fire had been contained within the flat, as you know, most of the other fires that I had experienced in my working career had, and no, it didn't. reinforce that compartmentalisation worked in.
So you didn't feel that the fact of evacuation, whether voluntary or prompted by the LFB, ought to have given cause to pause to think whether PEEPs might have been required for vulnerable and disabled residents?
No, because nobody fed that back as an issue in terms of either the evacuation. People didn't feed back as an issue for anybody.
And when you say nobody fed back, are you saying
So the
LFB didn't say anything to you?
So the fire brigade didn't feed back anything as an issue. It didn't come up at all as an issue.
Do you remember any lessons to be learned exercise being carried out either by the health and safety team or any other department of the TMO following the Trellick Tower fire?
Not following the Trellick Tower fire, no. No, although I think we were looking just at how we communicated internally with each other after that fire, as in who got told at night. So I didn't realise about it until the next morning in that particular circumstance.
Now can we turn on to a sort of linked topic, which is the emergency plan. Now, in your third statement to the inquiry, which can be found at TMO 100488982, and at page 2, in paragraph 7, you mentioned that there was an RBKC contingency management plan, and then you go on to say at paragraph 8, the TMO emergency plan was therefore intentionally not in operation at that time, as it would be wrong and potentially unsafe to have more than one emergency plan in place, as is recognised by the wider RBKC contingency management plan and multi-agency liaison protocols and procedures. You then go on at paragraph 11. Let's say I was not involved in training and emergency planning response. That came under the remit of Janice Ray. I'm aware that following the fire at Adair Tower, a joint RBKC and TMO review was undertaken of the emergency response to the fire, after which a joint contingency planning exercise between RBKC and TMO teams was undertaken. You say I was not involved in this exercise. As regard arrangements to warn, inform, advise the public in the event of an emergency like the Grenfell Tower fire, these fell under broader fire safety and health and safety arrangements. I was aware that as part of those arrangements, a stay put policy was in place in the event of a fire occurring at Grenfell Tower. How did you come to understand that the TMO emergency plan was not in operation?
In which circumstance? In Adair or?
Yes.
Yeah, in Adair fire. Because it was a larger scale fire. The fire brigades were there. They were controlling it, and the council had sent initially a what they called a LALO, authority liaison. Thank you.
Officer.
Yeah, they had sent one to the scene of the fire, and I knew Robert was liaising with them. On that occasion, they didn't stay as long as we had liked, but they had definitely thought it was their response right from the outside.
Now, you gave evidence showing phase 1 of the inquiry on the 16th of November 2018, when you confirmed that you were familiar with the TMO emergency plan, and you also confirmed that you understood that the TMO emergency plan would not use this plan due to the scale of the emergency on the 14th of June 2017. Now, could we go to the annual report for 2015-16, which is at TMO 00840,583. And this says that in major emergencies, I'm just trying to find the relevant section of it, but I'll read it out. In major emergencies, the council's emergency plan is activated. However, for more minor emergencies, which specifically affect our blocks, not major enough to require decanting of a whole block, TMO has its own emergency plan. And if we go to page 16, we can pick this up. Apologies. I don't think that is right.
No.
Anyway, I'll continue reading. In the wake of the serious fire at Adair Tower, the chief executive and the executive team reviewed the out-of-hours cascade, the roles and responsibilities of employees currently involved with the emergency plan and how this links to RBKC's emergency plan. The executive team confirmed TMO arrangements worked well and should remain in place. However, efforts to publicise this within the organisation are in hand. Were you aware of the nature and extent of the TMO arrangements before June 2017?
Yes, I was aware of the cascades. Yeah, the in-house and out of hours one.
Could you help us? How would you assess the size of an incident in order to identify which emergency plan would be implemented?
Basically, it was around whether it was something that the TMO could deal with themselves or other resources and assistance were needed. So if a rest centre was needed, it's really down to the scale of the emergency and how many properties were affected and impacted.
So a view is taken on the night, essentially?
In accordance with the circumstances, yes.
Now, could we turn to TMO 100-13898? Now, this is the emergency plan that was in place in June 2017. And if we can go to page 14 within this plan, it says vulnerable residents, near the top, that's it. Information on numbers of known vulnerable residents are included on the black property details, which form part of this plan. Did you ever provide up-to-date information on vulnerable residents to include in the property details of this element of the form?
No, and I wasn't asked to.
Were you aware of a need to do so?
No.
Did anyone discuss the need to do so?
Not that I remember.
Did Janice Ray ever raise the point with you?
No.
If we can go down further on this page, you'll see the heading Duty Rota. And it says this: a rota of on-call staff, mostly resident ESA, is maintained by the head of neighbourhood management. These staff are on call outside of normal working hours. The list is available to CSC and Pinnacle. It would appear that the ESAs would be the first staff on call to any incident. Is that a fair and accurate summary?
Some of them. It was on a rota basis, so not all of our ESAs were on our out of hours call rota. It was an optional thing. So,
if we can now turn to page 17 within this document, and we see in the top left a note which says key decision makers. So top right, I should say.
yeah.
Key decision makers are likely to be staff in the green shaded boxes. Now, how did you ensure that your team identified in the green shaded boxes and in white were aware of their responsibilities under the plan?
And I think this was well circulated. I think this was something that Janice led and did meet regularly with these people, particularly in respect of the out of hours. I actually wasn't on the out of hours rota, but I know that she, I believe that she did do training with them about what was required.
You believe? Do you know how regularly that training was provided?
I can't recall, I'm afraid.
Could we go to page 34? There we see checklist fire. Have you seen this page before, this checklist before?
I probably have. I don't recall it in any detail.
Do you recall it at all? Have you seen it before?
Um,
Have a read of it to refresh your memory.
No, I'm not sure with certainty.
Now, if we see on the far left-hand side, number 7, the question is, will residents have to be evacuated? Do you accept that is a question that ought to be considered in the event of a fire?
Yes, I do accept it's something that would have to be assessed, and I would see that to be the fire brigade to assess that when they arrived at the scene.
Does that mean that the TMO, in your view, has no role in deciding whether, to what extent, to evacuate?
Yeah, and it says here liaise with on-site staff. So, in all my experience, that has been a fire brigade decision at the time of a fire. It's not for us to decide. We wouldn't have the expertise or knowledge, I don't think.
But with respect, Mrs. Brown, it says liaise with on-site staff. It doesn't say liaise with the LFB, does it?
No, it doesn't say that. But if you're talking about a fire, they will be there at that stage.
But it's quite clear here, in answer to the question, will residents have to be evacuated, the answer, or the action, is liaise with on-site staff, presumably TMO staff. That's all that's said here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's no reference to the LFB, is there?
No, there isn't. But it's not saying that they make the decision. It's saying liaise with the staff on site. So staff on site will be communicating with other people in an emergency.
Can we go to a fire risk assessment for Grenfell, which can be found at CST quadruple 0 3145 and page 5. And we see in the final section of that, under the heading, the evacuation strategy for this building, it says, for the residents of this building, there is a stay put evacuation strategy. This means the residents can remain within their own dwelling, is otherwise affected by the fire, in which case they should immediately evacuate their dwelling and call the fire and rescue service. The fire service or TMO employees will arrange for a general evacuation of the whole building at any time, if this is appropriate to do so. Now, the first point there is the fire risk assessment itself anticipates the TMO having some role there as well, doesn't it? In relation to evacuation.
Yes, it does.
Now, given that there had been an evacuation at Adair in October 2015 and Trellick in April 2017,
Yeah.
would you agree that the TMO's recent experience before the Grenfell fire gave no assurance that stay put would be appropriate in all circumstances?
No, I don't agree with that. The Adair fire was contained within one flat, and not the Adair, the Trellick fire. And the Adair fire, I do know that our ESA was on site, so played some kind of role in that. I don't know precisely, but he was on site. Robert was on site. But I don't think that, they played the major role in the evacuation. In that circumstance, it was the fire brigade who took control and did that. But we did have staff on site.
Okay. Can we now turn to the topic of fire safety complaints? And if we could turn to your first statement, please, Mrs. Brown. TMO 000 00 895 on page 4 and paragraph 20 in particular. And here you explain the complaints procedure. Now, to break this down, at stage 1, the team complained about would respond to the complaint. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And then if the complaint was escalated to stage 2, you would oversee the complaint. Is that right?
Yeah, and the head of service would deal with it, and then I would just have a look at that. Yeah.
And so did you oversee the team leader's responses to the stage 1 complaints?
No, I didn't do that.
Who did?
I believe that the head of service would.
And what was the role of the complaints team in this process, in your experience?
So the complaints team logged and monitored our complaints. So they set timescales and they logged them and they divvied them out to the most appropriate person to deal with them. And then we sent our responses back to them before they went out. And
how did you monitor staff understanding of the complaints procedure and how to monitor it?
How did I monitor it?
Well, taking it stage by stage, did you ensure that your staff were trained and how to pursue or how to apply the complaints process?
I don't remember any specific training, but I know that they were aware of how to do it. They dealt with complaints and they responded to them appropriately. And
So when you say you weren't aware of any specific training, were they trained on how to apply the complaints process?
I can't remember any training, but I would imagine that they had been, and they were familiar with the complaints process, and I didn't have any concern to think they weren't applying it appropriately to say that they needed any additional training, but I can't confirm when they would have had any.
And so you had no concerns expressed to you directly about the adequacy or the effectiveness or the efficiency with which your staff manage the complaints process?
No.
Were you aware of the complaints policy definition of complaints, inquiries and service requests?
Yeah.
And how did you decide? How would you classify a matter that was put before you? What criteria would you apply?
So it's very clear that sort of a service request was not a complaint. That was the initial request for service. So a complaint would have been a dissatisfaction with service by ourselves or the contractor, or also about an attitude of either ourselves or someone providing the service.
And were you trained on the appropriate criteria to apply to determine correctly the right classification?
I don't remember that, but I did know about it. I was fully aware of it, as were my staff.
Can you remember whether there was any issue with complaints being misclassified as inquiries?
I don't remember that specifically, no.
Can you recall now what information was provided to residents about the complaints process itself?
The complaints process was publicised. It was on our website. I think it was in Link, and we would, I think it was also, there was information in our receptions, in our 3 receptions. And
if we could turn to Housing Monthly Team Meeting on the 31st of March 2014, we looked at this slightly earlier, and it's at TMO 00850807. Okay, you were there, and if we turn to page 4, item 8.0, complaints process filing, and we see the minute at item 8.2, team need to send responses to CMTB. Can you help us? Who was CM?
T was my PA.
So TB can read. TB will advise when it can be sent. Complaints team should be copied in at that stage. Where councillors send inquiries directly to section heads, teams, leaders, it is fine for them to respond directly. Did you sign off all responses to complaints addressed to your team?
No, I didn't. I didn't do stage 1. I would have reviewed stage 2. I don't remember doing all of the councillor inquiries, because sometimes they were emails and they would have responded to some of those directly, yeah.
If a complaint went straight to your team, would that mean it wasn't recorded?
No. If complaints came straight to our teams, we should have logged them with the complaints team.
Okay. Now, could we turn to another minute of the Housing Monthly Team Meeting, this time on the 26th of August 2014, and this is at TMO 00851809. And if we can go to page 2, and in particular item 2.6. And there there's the heading, roughly halfway down the page, complaints. This information is meaningless if there is no breakdown. The statistics are not reflective of what is happening. Target dates are rolled out, which means that they are still within target. Sometimes complainants are not getting a full response for 70 to 100 days. TB to discuss with Siobhan Bowman or Janet Seaward. Did you discuss that problem with either of those ladies?
Well, I believe that I did. I didn't raise that as an issue. Somebody in my team had told me. So these aren't my words. This is a record of what someone else said, and I believe that we did.
When you say we, did you discuss that concern with either Siobhan Bowman and or Janet Seward?
So I can't remember specifically doing it, but what I can say is that we did implement quite a W2 process around it, a CRM process around it that really logged and tracked complaints and sent us reminders. So I know that if these were issues previously, they were issues that we worked on and resolved as an organisation, and that there was, a solid process for monitoring and making sure that people responded.
Can you give us, excuse me, some detail as to what actions you or your team took to address the problem?
So, we developed the CRM system and the workflow that went with that directed, how people should respond, and tracked and logged that as the complaint went along.
Okay. Now, can we go back to your first statement, which is at TMO 000 895, page 2, and in particular paragraph 12. It just flows on from the answer you've just given. You say that if residents drew attention to wider issues of safety or technical specification for repairs, it would be recorded on CRM and directed to the appropriate department for a response. And then you continue in the final sentence, say this: if that matter had any general health and safety or fire safety implications, the matter would be referred to the health and safety team to deal with. The first question is the obvious one. What matters would be identified as having, quotes, health and safety or fire safety implications, close quotes?
So if maybe it was to do with a fire risk assessment and action from that, or I'm trying to think of some more examples.
Would residents have raised an FRA action? Do you have?
No, residents wouldn't have. Sorry, no, they wouldn't. I'm trying to think of one. So, for example, the issue of that mobility scooter that we had, that one of my neighbourhood officers was dealing with, that would have been something that she would have just likely discussed with health and safety team. So that may be an example. Was
any guidance or training provided to your staff to identify what could be properly classified as fire safety matters?
I'm not sure.
Being more specific as to particular matters that may fall within the scope of fire safety implications, would repairs to flat entrance doors be identified as a fire safety issue?
Yes, but they wouldn't. Repairs to flat safety doors wouldn't necessarily go to Janice. They were something that was dealt with by our repairs direct. So if we identified an issue with a flat front door, it would go to. It would be logged through our customer service centre and sent to RD to deal with, repairs direct to deal with.
And does that answer apply equally to if there were an issue reported about communal doors?
Yes, they would repair them.
And self-closing devices?
Yes.
If any matter was referred to the health and safety team, what arrangements were in place to monitor whether the health and safety team had actually responded in time and satisfactorily to any issue raised?
So if it was logged on our CRM system and allocated to them as an action, you could tell when they'd responded.
How?
Because your response is logged, and the email that you sent is recorded and tracked within that system.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Now, Ms. Brown, we've come to the end of my prepared questions. You'll remember from 2 years ago that we now have a break of a quarter of an hour, if that's all right with you, sir, and when we see if there are any further matters which I should ask, which I haven't done, and if there are any other lines of questioning.
Yes. Well, as you know, we need to have a break now just to sweep up any further questions. So we'll stop now until 10 to 3, please.
Okay.
And then we'll see if there are more questions for you at that stage.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, 10 to 3 then.
Thanks, sir.
Okay. Would you ask Mrs. Brown to come back in, please? All right, Mrs. Brown?
Yeah.
Right, well, let's see if there are any more questions for you. Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
There are just a few, sir.
Yes.
Ms. Brown, thank you. Could we go to TMO H 000 00907? And could we go to the bottom of page 3 of this chain? And you'll see there an email from Andrea Newton sent to Sasha Jevons, copying others at the TMO on the 9th of March 2016. If we can go to page 4, and we see from the top of page 4, 5 lines down, there's a sentence which starts, "I'll get straight to it." And then Andrew Newton says, "I feel there's a huge lack of coordination within TMO and Repairs Direct." Now, if I can go back to page 1, and you'll see at the bottom of the page, Sasha Jevons forwarded that email to you. Now, when you received this email, did you read the email chain below it? And so you saw the complaints that Andrea Newton had raised about lack of coordination between TMO and Repairs Direct.
Yeah, it was around that and a lot of other things, yeah.
And were you aware of concerns expressed by residents about the TMO's management of repairs?
I knew yes, I was aware that she had some concerns, yes.
Were those concerns widespread, or were they confined to Andrea Newton?
I don't think they would have been confined to Andrea Newton.
And what was the essential nature of the concerns that were expressed to you?
So I think at the time, and this is shortly before the fire, I think, it's a year before, I think overall performance was, according to, was quite good in terms of performance indicators. But I think there are always issues that you can improve upon. And I think through the work that I did through my teams, through the customer service centre who ordered repairs, you could see that there were some issues where we could improve upon things like leaks and repeat jobs, and those types of things were issues that we were continually looking at and trying to improve. So I was aware of that. And
what practical measures did you take to respond to Andrea Newton's complaint? Can you now remember?
Yes, I can specifically. So Graham Webb, Managing Director of Repairs Direct, and myself did a walkabout with Andrea Newton. And I think Nikki attended, Nikki Bartholomew, the New Lanc West manager at the time. And we walked the whole estate, making a note of any issues that she had concerns about.
Thank you. Can I now turn to a separate topic, that's of resident engagement? Your statements don't refer to any of the residents' organisations relevant to Grenfell. First of all, do you accept that engagement with resident organisations is a crucial part of housing management?
Yes.
And what do you consider would be achieved from engagement with resident organisations?
You get feedback about services and how they feel they're going and what the key issues are, from their point of view, and it helps you shape and improve services. I think we certainly picked up on some of the things that Andrea Newton was saying at this time and implemented them, particularly around repairs direct. So I did a structural review in neighbourhood services where we looked at the office and the services provided by the office, and we made sure that we could report repairs directly at that office going forward. And the CSE member of staff that we had was on reception was put there as a result of that reorganisation and this sort of feedback.
And what would be the nature and extent of the engagement you would expect one of your neighbourhood teams to have with the residents group?
So I know that Nikki Bartholomew and her team built a very good relationship with the RA there, and they did fortnightly walkabouts with them to keep in touch with any issues that they may have.
Did you monitor the levels of resident engagement that were consistent with your expectations?
Not specifically. I mean, I was aware of discussions and things that were happening, and I didn't see any concern to be involved in them any more than I had previously. So I thought that the relationship was going well. They seemed to be building a good relationship. Andrew Newton was very complimentary about the work of that neighbourhood team.
And what contact did you yourself have with, for example, the Lancaster West Residents Association?
So I did the walkabout with the Lancaster Residents Association at this time. I didn't have any day-to-day input with them. So, they were meeting with Nikki and her team, and above that there were a head of service. So I didn't do so on a day-to-day basis, but I would have done had I needed to, thought it was necessary.
Would the same answer apply to the Grenfell Tower Leaseholders Association? What was your contact with that body?
I didn't meet with them, but I did respond to elements of their emails and complaints that were relevant to my team. So I wouldn't have directly replied to them, but I would have given comments or paragraphs within that response.
And what was your contact with the Grenfell Tower Compact?
I think I went to a couple of meetings with the Grenfell Compact, but they were largely attended by Pete Madison and my head of service, but I did go to a few of those, yes.
Can I turn to a separate topic now, which is equality and diversity training? What training did you receive in relation to the TMO's duties towards residents with protected characteristics under the Equality Act?
I didn't attend any particular training there.
Were you aware of the public sector equality duty and how it applied to residents?
Probably, but I can't recall.
Did you receive any equalities training particularly directed to the needs of the vulnerable or disabled?
Yes, I have over my career. Yes, definitely. I have specialised in ASB and over the years, and spent a lot of time either organising or being involved in training on those particular matters. So, that would have been all of the skills that were required to respond to vulnerable residents, not just within antisocial behaviour, but more broadly, as we've talked about earlier today.
Whose role was it to ensure that the adequacy of communication of fire safety information to residents with an additional language or other communication needs?
That all the communication would have been from our health and safety team. They led on that communication.
Are you aware of any consideration given to proactively offering fire safety advice to tenants based on their first language, which they were known to speak?
No, I don't think that we did do that. Although there was obviously a translation strip in our publications, and we would have carried out translation had we been asked, and did on occasions on other matters. I knew that my team were having things translated.
Thank you. Mrs. Brown, I've come to the end of my questions for today. The final question, is there anything you'd like to say to the panel over and above the evidence that you've given during the course of today?
I think we spent a lot of time talking about peeps today. Perhaps I shouldn't actually go there. No.
No, I don't if you don't feel comfortable, but...
I just think it's a very complicated area of business, and I think it's thought really needs to be given about the guidance. It needs to be really thought through. It's very complicated in terms of how you keep peeps up to date, how you implement them in evacuation situations. It's obviously the subject of much debate, but it is something where there needs to be absolute clarity on for everybody going forward. I think that's something I would say.
Mrs. Brown,
Thank you.
thank you very much for attending to give evidence today. We're most grateful.
Thank you.
Well, Mrs. Brown, before you go, let me thank you, if I may, on behalf of all the members of the panel. I think we understand that it's not easy to come here and give evidence, and this is the second time you've done it, so we are very grateful to you. It's been very helpful to hear what you have to tell us, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank
Now
you.
it's all over and you can go.
To the next time. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kinnear, now is that it for today?
That is it for today, and we start again on Monday at 10 o'clock with another TMO
With
witness.
another witness, yes, good. Well, thank you very much. Well, then we'll break there and resume at 10 o'clock on Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Good, thank you.